Okay, chapter 12 is called Sailing Through the Snow. So the Santa Claus's sleigh just cracked. The puppies all froze. They stared at the golden sleigh. A giant crack sliced straight down the middle. Was Christmas ruined? Wally had been pulling to the right as hard as he could, and he felt like this was partly his fault. "I'm sorry," Wally woofed. "No, I'm sorry," the husky named Dasher barked back. "We're sorry," Piggly and Pugly yipped together. Soon, the puppy pirates and the North Pole Racers were apologizing to each other and to Mrs. Claus. Even Captain Redbeard dipped his nose in his paws. "I'm usually the best at everything," he told Blizzard quietly, "but maybe I'm not the best at sharing." "It was my fault too," Blizzard told him. "Well, you're right about that," Captain Redbeard barked. But he barked it nicely, at least. "And you were right. You were also right that at a tie means we both won. Your team ran a good race." "Exactly as good as your team," Blizzard said. "In case you are wondering, Santa can't deliver us presents without his sleigh," Henry said, "so what do we do?" Mrs. Claus shook her head sadly. "I don't know, and Christmas starts tonight." "Well, can we fix it?" Wally asked. Just as he said that, the sleigh let out another loud crack. Everyone jumped out of the way as the enormous sled split into 4 parts. Gifts spilled out all over the ground. "We have millions of presents to deliver," Mrs. Claus said, "and no way to deliver them." "Will Christmas be canceled?" Frosty asked, his head hanging low. The other dogs whined and moaned. Here's a little picture. "Canceled?" Redbeard howled. "No. Maybe we could use a different sleigh," Wally suggested. "Every team that raced today was pulling a sled," Henry pointed out. "Couldn't Santa use one of those sleds?" Mrs. Claus frowned. "None of them are big enough. Even if we used all the sleds in the whole village, we still wouldn't have enough room for all the gifts. But if I had more time, I could fix Santa's sleigh, but with only an hour until sunset, that is not possible." "Only 1 hour until sunset?" Pugly yelped. "No wonder my stomach is grumbling. It's dinner time." At that, Pugly's tummy let out a loud rumble. "I sure could use one of those steak-eye steaks right about now," she said. "A pup can't live on marshmallows and peanut butter." Wally laughed. Even when things were at the worst, the pugs never stopped thinking about food. Wally was hungry too. He did imagine that big crate full of steaks. Then he suddenly got an idea. "Maybe we have more sleds than we think," he told the others. "What are you yapping about, little Walty?" Captain Redbeard asked. Are you hiding sleds?" "Remember when the pugs turned our steak crate into a sled yesterday?" Wally said, glancing at Piggly and Pugly. "Of course, that wasn't a real sleigh, but it worked like one. I bet we could find other things that we could turn into sleds just for the night. They don't have to be fancy, they just have to get the job done." "Well, I have an idea," Henry broke in. "Maybe we could use the dinghies from the Salty Bone as extra sleighs." So dinghies are like little extra boats on a big boat. Wally woofed in approval. "The little wooden boats that hang off the side of the ship, those would make perfect sleighs." Mrs. Claus looked hopeful. "It's certainly worth a try," she said. "But who gets to pull the sleds?" Captain Redbeard asked. "Who gets the treasure?" Frosty said, "Maybe this year it's time for the village to start a new tradition. Instead of just the winners getting to deliver the presents, every pup who wants to join in can pull a sled." "We need all the help we can get," agreed Old Salt. "Hear, hear," everyone barked. And for the next hour, the whole village worked together to turn as many things possible into sleds. Everyone then helped the pups load gifts in hundreds of different sleds. Mrs. Claus took pictures and helped with the sled repairs. The puppies had made sleds out of boxes, food crates, and large frisbees. Some of these could only fit 1 or 2 gifts, but they were light enough that the little puppies like Einstein and Curly, and the pugs could pull them because they're small. All the great ice race teams loaded their sleds high. The rest of the Salty Bone crew harnessed themselves up into the ship's dinghies. Even though they didn't look like sleds, the little boats held a lot of gifts. And they slid smooth over the ice and the snow. As the last gifts were loaded, Wally searched for Frosty in the crowd. He found the little husky pup cuddled into Mrs. Claus's arms. Frosty was shivering, and it was a biting cold night air. "Aren't you coming, Frosty?" Wally asked. He didn't want his friend to miss out. "Not this time," Frosty told him. His little nose and eyes were the only things sticking out of Mrs. Claus's thick winter parka. "It's too cold tonight." Oh, remember, he's just a little puppy. He's cold. Mrs. Claus winked at Wally. Then she pulled a special Frosty-sized parka out of her pocket. "For me?" Frosty said with his eyes real wide. "Merry Christmas, Frosty." She slipped the parka over Frosty's pointed ears and zipped it tight against his belly. She wrapped his feet in the booties and tucked a warm bottle into the special pocket at the bottom of the jacket. "The cold isn't going to keep you from going on this adventure, little pup," she said with a smile. Then she carried Frosty over the largest sleigh and plopped him inside, and he sat right beside Henry. "Did you hear that?" Henry asked. He tilted his head like he was listening to something in the distance. Wally's ears pricked up. He listened hard. He could hear jingle bells. The sound was coming closer and closer. It was getting louder and louder. "There you are!" Mrs. Claus's face lit up with a grin. "I was afraid you would miss it." Wally wondered who she was talking to, and then... Ho, ho, ho! The air shook with a booming laugh. A large human stepped out into the night. The man was wearing a big red hat, stroking his fluffy white beard, and he chuckled and said, "Miss Christmas, never." Who is it? Santa. So let's see what happens. "Santa!" the puppies cried. They bounced up and down and started wagging their tails. "I hear you pups saved Christmas," Santa said, reaching down to scratch the dogs behind their ears. The puppies all glowed with pride. "Now whose sleigh do I ride in?" Blizzard cleared his throat. "Well, if you ask me." Well, Captain Redbeard barked loudly over Blizzard. "I know the answer to that one, Santa." Wally watched the two captains nervously. What would Santa think if they started fighting again? "You should ride with the North Pole Racers," Captain Redbeard said. Wow, that was surprising. "After all, I hear they're the best sled dogs in the world." He winked at Blizzard, and Santa deserves the best. Santa patted Captain Redbeard on the head, and he ruffled Wally's fur. Then he climbed into the husky sled. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's get on with the giving." Mrs. Claus waved her hand through the air. Sparkling snowflakes swirled all around them. Wally thought he must be imagining it, but for a moment it almost felt as if his feet left the ground. The snug harness around his belly suddenly felt loose and comfortable, and for some reason the dinghy now felt weightless, even under the weight of all those hundreds of presents. Bells jingled from every corner of the village. The time had finally come. Santa bellowed, "Ho, ho, ho!" and all the dogs set off at a run. Wally raced through the twinkling snow, howling with joy. This was going to be a night none of them would ever forget. All right, that was Chapter 12. Chapter 13 tomorrow. Chapter 13 is called Frosty's New Adventure.